The town square fell silent as a four-star general raised his hand, not to the mayor, not to the color guard, but to me name's Clara Dempsey, government analyst or so folks thought. The breeze snapped my grandfather's old service cap in my grip. Ever had a moment when the world suddenly saw you for who you are? In a town where every porch flies the stars and stripes. Clara Dempsey walks quietly past, noticed by few, remembered by fewer. The soft slap of her sensible shoes on the cracked sidewalk blends into the hum of morning life in Maplewood, Pennsylvania. The air, crisp with autumn's promise, carries the mingled scents of wood smoke and chimney fires. Maple and oak leaves skitter along the curbs, red and gold against the gray concrete. As Clara passes the Maple Diner, its neon sign blinking wearily in the morning light, she catches the tail end of laughter from inside. Through the window, she sees her sister Megan, uniform sharp as a razor, recounting some bass exercise to a captive audience. Locals lean in coffee cups in hand, their admiration plain. From his spot on a worn porch chair, Mr. Nolan taps his cane lightly against his boot. His gaze follows Clara with that steady, knowing look that makes her spine straighten unconsciously. The old veteran, wrapped in a cardigan, as weathered as his skin, gives a slow nod, one she feels more than sees. His unspoken acknowledgement settles around her like a comfort. Clara's path takes her past the hardware store, where flags flutter proudly above the door, then up the hill toward the modest house she's always called home. Frank Dempsey stands in the yard jacket, zipped up against the morning chill, the small flag pin on his lapel glinting in the pale sunlight. His stance is solid, his hands shoved into his pockets, gaze on the street like a sentry at ease. "Well, there she is," he calls, voice gruff but warm. "Got everything you needed?" Clara lifts the brown paper bag slightly. "Milk, bread, coffee filters, and apples. Thought I'd make a pie." Frank's face brightens at that. "That's my girl. You keep us going. Megan's out there defending freedom, and you're keeping this household straight." There's affection in his tone, but it lands heavy. Clara smiles, nodding as she steps onto the porch, though the words sting in the quiet place she keeps for herself. Inside the house smells faintly of coffee and the lemon polish Frank uses religiously on the sideboard. She unpacks the groceries, stacking the apples in the blue glass bowl on the table. A knock at the door brings Pastor Williams, his broad frame filling the entry, cheeks pink from the chill. His voice, warm and kind, fills the room as he steps inside. "Frank, Clara. Good morning. Just making my rounds about the Veterans Day ceremony. We'd be honored if the Dempseys would play a part this year." Frank claps him on the back. "You can count on us. Megan will be home on leave. She can coordinate the whole thing. No one better for the job." Before Clara can speak, Megan's boots sound on the porch. She steps inside, cheeks flushed, wind catching at her hair. "Pastor, I'd be glad to help. I've got some ideas for the color guard, maybe bring in the Academy's choir." Pastor Williams beams. "Bless you, Megan. That'll mean the world to folks." Clara clears her throat gently. "I can help with programs. Maybe chairs." Megan grins, already pulling out her notepad. "Thanks, Clara. That'd be great." Frank nods, distracted by visions of flags and marching bands. The conversation flows around Clara, and she lets it slipping into her familiar role of support, the steady background hum to Megan's fanfare. When Pastor Williams takes his leave, promising to follow up, soon the house quiets again. Later that afternoon, Clara steps onto the porch, the sun low and gold through the bare trees. Mr. Nolan stands at his gate, one hand resting atop the latch, his cane balanced against his leg. His voice is soft, almost lost in the breeze. Funny thing, folks only see the uniforms, not the quiet work behind the scenes. His eyes meet hers, and for a heartbeat she feels seen. Evening comes with the clatter of dishes and the smell of pot roast. At dinner, Frank's voice is full of pride as he lifts his glass. Megan will be leading this year's Veterans Day ceremony. Our family's tradition of service carries on. Clara, slicing her meat in neat squares, nods. I'll help however I can. Of course, sweetheart, Frank says, already turning to discuss the schedule with Megan. His thanks is automatic, a brush of acknowledgement that leaves no real mark. The meal winds down with talk of logistics of uniforms and speeches of parade routes and guests of honor. Clara listens, contributes where she can, and clears the dishes while Frank and Megan strategize at the table. When the house quiets at last, Clara steps outside. The sidewalk glistens faintly where the dew has settled the air sharp with the promise of frost. She watches the leaves swirl on the sidewalk, feeling the weight of invisibility settle again. In a town that honors service with parades and plaques, Clara's kind goes unseen, but not unfelt. The morning light edged through the thin curtains of her modest home office, catching on the dust motes that danced in the air. Clara sat at her small desk, her posture steady, her eyes fixed on the screen, where encrypted lines of text blinked briefly before vanishing. The hum of the heater filled the room, along with the faint aroma of the coffee she'd forgotten to drink. In the corner of the desk, a faded photo of Grandpa Walter in his WU uniform watched over her, his calm expression both a comfort and a reminder. The secure call ended with a soft click, leaving the room silent, except for the ticking of the old mantel clock in the hallway. Clara exhaled slowly, her mind retracing the conversation, a minor but real threat near the Veterans Day ceremony. A few words of analysis from her had shifted the plan, and now local authorities were quietly adjusting protocols. No headlines would trumpet it, no speeches would note it. She reached into the locked drawer and slid the file inside, hearing the satisfying snick of the latch. The quiet satisfaction of a job well done settled in her chest, warm but fleeting. Later that day, the American Legion Hall creaked under the weight of its history and the gathering of familiar faces. The walls, wood-paneled and worn, bore the marks of countless meetings, fundraisers, and memorials. Faded posters from the WU years reminded all who entered of the sacrifices of generations past. The smell of overbrewed coffee mixed with the faint sweetness of donuts that had sat out too long. Clara took a seat near the back where she could observe without drawing attention. The chairs groaned beneath shifting weight as neighbors settled in murmuring greetings, some with hats respectfully doffed. Megan stood near the front posture, perfect, her notepad balanced just so as she outlined plans for the ceremony. Her voice, clear and confident, filled the hall. Proposals for a color guard from the nearby base, a school choir singing the anthem, even a possible flyover if the budget allowed. The room nodded along, pride swelling in the quiet approval that met each idea. Clara listened, fingers folded neatly in her lap. When Megan paused for input, she spoke up gently. We could stagger the seating to help with traffic flow, and I can draft the program if you like. There was a polite pause. Someone coughed. Megan smiled thinly. That's kind, Clara. I think we're covered, but I'll let you know. Frank, seated beside the Legion commander, beamed at his younger daughter. We're lucky to have her at the helm, he said, voice loud enough to carry to the back of the room. The small audience offered the expected polite applause, the kind that filled space without much enthusiasm. The meeting wrapped with final notes and thanks chairs scraping back as neighbors rose, chatting in small groups, finishing the last sips of lukewarm tea. As Clara made her way to the door, Mr. Nolan intercepted her with slow, deliberate steps. He reached into his pocket and drew out a small, weathered flag pin, the colors muted with age. His hand closed around hers, pressing it into her palm. For someone who serves, whether folks see it or not, he said quietly, his gaze steady beneath bushy brows. Clara felt the pin's weight in her hand light yet solid, and her throat tightened with the emotion she kept carefully out of sight. Night fell soft and dark over Maplewood. The streetlights flickered on along Main Street as Clara returned home, the house quiet, except for the soft ticking of the hallway clock. She booted up the secure laptop once more, the screen's glow, the only light in the room. An encrypted message blinked confirmation. Her small intervention earlier had steered events onto a safer course. The ceremony would go on, no one the wiser for what might have been. She stood by her window watching Main Street go dark, wondering if her family will ever truly see her. Maplewood polished its brass and straightened its flags, ready to honor its heroes, unaware of the one walking quietly in its midst. The late afternoon sun slanted low across the town square, casting long shadows of banners that rippled softly in the breeze. Honoring our heroes declared the largest of them, its letters bold against the crisp November sky. The air held a bite at 48 degrees F, sharp enough to bring color to the cheeks of the children, weaving through the gathering adults, paper flags clutched in small hands. Vendors lined the edges of the square, their steaming vats of cider perfuming the air with sweet spice. The school choir's voices rose in hesitant harmony from the bandstand, their practice run mingling with the murmur of final preparations. Clara moved among the folding chairs, setting them in neat rows, her breath visible as faint clouds in the cooling air. Her fingers, chilled despite her gloves, worked quickly, methodically. The clatter of metal on concrete as a chair leg slipped drew no attention from the cluster of townsfolk admiring the school choir or the television crew adjusting their lights around Megan. The younger Dempsey stood at the square's heart, her uniform crisp boots polished to a high shine that caught the last of the sunlight. She spoke into the microphone, with practiced ease, her words about sacrifice and service drawing approving nods from those nearby. Clara straightened, watching for a moment, as the cameraman framed Megan, just so the town's flags a perfect backdrop. The applause at the end of the brief interview was polite but genuine. Pastor Williams bustled past, a clipboard in hand, double-checking the program order, his voice warm with encouragement for the students and volunteers alike. Frank stood near the veterans' display, carefully adjusting his old uniform jacket, the fabric hanging a little looser than it once had. His medals, polished until they gleamed, caught the dying light. He lifted one between finger and thumb, as if ensuring it still shone with its original luster. His gaze swept the square, pride evident as he watched Megan field another question from a local reporter. Clara bent again to adjust a row that had shifted slightly, willing her hands steady, her mind on the quiet task of keeping things in order. The sound of footsteps on the cobblestones drew her attention as Mr. Nolan approached. His pace was slow but deliberate, his cane tapping softly in time. He leaned closer, voice pitched low to carry only to her ears. "I'll save you a seat front row where you belong," he said, the corners of his mouth lifting in a brief, knowing smile. Clara's lips curved faintly in return, and she murmured her thanks. The old veteran gave a small nod and moved on, blending into the edges of the crowd, where he could observe without intruding. As the rehearsal continued, Megan coordinated with the TV crew, ensuring camera angles, reviewing cue points, and smoothing the final details of the program. Her confidence filled the space, drawing attention wherever she moved. Frank hovered nearby, occasionally offering a suggestion, his pride in his daughter visible in every glance and gesture. The hum of conversation softened as the sound of a car approaching caught the square's collective ear. Dusk crept in as headlights glinted off polished chrome. The vehicle eased into a reserved spot near the reviewing stand, the door opening with practiced precision. General Greer emerged, his presence commanding without effort. His uniform immaculate in the fading light seemed to absorb the attention of everyone present. For a fleeting moment, his gaze swept the square and found Clara. His expression revealed nothing, but his eyes held hers intent and unreadable. Then the moment passed, and he turned to greet Megan, and frank handshakes, offered pleasantries exchanged as the official party gathered. As the flag lowered at the sunset rehearsal, the choir's voices falling quiet, Clara felt the moment approaching, one that will change everything. The square fell silent, not from command, but from awe at a gesture no one expected. Morning sun pushed through the low clouds, spilling gold onto Maplewood's town square. The flags lining Main Street stirred gently in the cool breeze, the fabric whispering against its poles. Banners rippled above the gathered crowd, their bold letters bright in the light of Veterans Day. The sweet tang of hot cider drifted from vendors at the edge of the square, mingling with the faint smokiness of distant chimneys. A hush fell as the school choir's final note dissolved into the air, leaving only the soft shuffle of feet on brick and the sigh of autumn wind. Clara stood near the rear of the crowd, hands folded before her, posture composed. She kept to the edges as she always did, watching Megan at the podium. Megan's uniform caught the sun's glow, the creases sharp, her boots polished until they mirrored the sky. Her voice, strong and sure, carried easily, speaking of service, sacrifice, and the debt owed to those who stood watch so others could sleep in peace. Applause rose at the speech's end, polite at first, then building as townsfolk clapped with real feeling, heads nodding, hearts stirred. Pastor Williams stepped forward, his tone reverent, as he led a prayer for those lost and those who served. The town bowed their heads, a sea of stillness, broken only by the rustle of jackets and the soft cough of the cold morning air. Scouts advanced with slow, solemn steps, wreath held steady between them, placing it at the memorial's base. A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd as the pastor stepped back. General Greer, standing tall beside the podium, moved forward. His uniform bore its years of service with quiet dignity, the stars on his shoulders glinting. He paused, his notes forgotten in his hand. The crowd leaned in, expecting words. But Greer did not speak. His gaze swept over the faces before him, neighbors, veterans, schoolchildren, officials, until it found Clara. The hush deepened, the air itself seeming to still. Greer straightened to full attention. With slow precision born of countless ceremonies, he raised his right hand in salute, not to the flag nor the memorial, but to Clara. The flutter of flags was the only sound as the crowd froze, breath held in collective disbelief. A full general saluting a civilian, eyes widened, conversations died on parted lips. Greer held the salute, his expression resolute, a message louder than any speech he might have given. Clara, heart pounding beneath the calm mask she wore, met his gaze. After a long beat, she nodded almost imperceptibly. The first whispers stirred at the square's edges, carried on the wind like falling leaves. Who is she? Long after the applause died down, the salute echoed in every corner of town. The morning sun had climbed higher, casting slanting beams through the worn blinds of the Maple Diner. Inside, the clink of coffee cups and the soft scrape of forks against pie plates filled the air, mingling with the comforting scent of frying bacon and the faint hum of the old jukebox in the corner. Outside, the town's flags snapped in the steady breeze, the fabric bright against the deep blue of the November sky. The diner buzzed with conversation voices, low but eager, as neighbors leaned across tables, replaying the moment they had witnessed only hours before. The general's salute. The quiet woman at the back, the meaning behind it all, questions hung in the air, like the aroma of coffee and wood polish. Clara sat near the window, hands folded around a warm mug, gaze steady on the world beyond the glass. The steam rose between her and the curious glances that came her way. One by one, familiar faces approached. A man she'd known since childhood, offered his hand, his grip firm and respectful. "Didn't realize, Clara," he said simply, words carrying more weight than explanation could. A woman from the school board nodded as she passed. "You've done us proud." The words startled Clara more than she let show. Each kind word, each quiet handshake left ripples she could feel but not quite name. At her side, Megan stirred sugar into her coffee, the spoon clinking rhythmically against the cup. She glanced at Clara, curiosity clear beneath her careful tone. "Clara, what did that mean?" The salute, Clara smiled gently, eyes on the flags outside. "Just respect, I suppose." Her voice was soft, even leaving no room for further questions, yet offering no offense. Megan studied her brow furrowed as if trying to fit puzzle pieces that refused to align. Frank slid into the booth, his movements slower than usual, his expression thoughtful. His coffee sat untouched, as his gaze rested on Clara, not searching, just seeing perhaps for the first time in a way that mattered. The din of the diner seemed to recede as he spoke, voice quiet. "I should have seen it. I'm proud of you. No fanfare, no speech. Just the truth laid bare." Mr. Nolan raised his chipped mug from across the room, his voice clear and warm, carried easily. "To all who serve, seen or not." The toast drew a soft murmur of agreement, the clink of mugs raised in quiet solidarity. Clara lifted hers, meeting his eyes with a nod of gratitude that said more than words could manage. As the crowd thinned, as plates were cleared and refills offered, Megan lingered, watching her sister with a new kind of wonder. When at last the table was theirs alone, she hesitated, then spoke low. "Tomorrow. Breakfast. Just us." The question hung between them, fragile but hopeful, as the jukebox played on and the town's small shifts continued. Nods from neighbors who'd never looked twice before, smiles that spoke of newfound respect. In the quiet after the storm, understanding bloomed like dawn breaking over Maplewood. The Maple Diner opened its doors to the new day, the warmth inside a welcome contrast to the lingering bite of morning frost outside. The corner booth by the window offered a view of the town square where the flag flew high, its colors vibrant against the pale November sky. Inside, sunlight slanted through the blinds, casting soft golden stripes across the table where Clara and Megan sat. The air smelled of maple syrup, fresh coffee, and bacon sizzling on the griddle, with the faintest trace of wood smoke drifting in whenever someone opened the door. Clara's hands cradled a mug of steaming coffee, the ceramic warm against her skin. She sat at ease, the tension of the past days melted into the soft hum of the diner's morning rhythm. Across from her, Megan stirred a small pot of creamer into her cup, watching the swirl of white and black as if searching for answers. Her uniform had been traded for a simple navy sweater and jeans, but her posture still hinted at the discipline drilled into her bones. They ate in companionable silence at first. Clara's fork sliced neatly through a stack of pancakes, the syrup pooling on her plate catching the light like amber. Megan toyed with her own meal, gaze flicking to the window, to the square beyond, then back to Clara. Finally, Megan spoke, voice low, hesitant. "Clara, I meant it yesterday. I want to understand. I think I need to." Her fingers traced the rim of her mug as she waited, uncertain. Clara lifted her eyes, meeting her sister's without defense, without evasion. "Some of it I can't explain," she said gently. "Some of it I won't. But duty's not always about the uniform or the ceremony or who's watching. It's about what needs doing, whether anyone knows or not." Megan absorbed the words, her shoulders softening, the weight of pride and regret mingling in her expression. "I never thought about service that way," she admitted, her voice thick with something unspoken. "I was so focused on what I could see." I didn't see what mattered most. Their conversation flowed between bites of pancakes and sips of coffee, unhurried, honest. The diner around them was alive with the small comforts of community, the clink of dishes being cleared, the soft chatter of neighbors recounting the ceremony, the hum of the jukebox playing a tune older than either of them. Outside the town stirred children on bikes with flags taped to the handlebars, shopkeepers sweeping their stoops, a train whistle sounding in the distance like a memory. Frank arrived as the plates grew empty, sliding into the booth with care, his face thoughtful. He didn't speak at first, just took in the sight of his daughters sitting together, really seeing each other for the first time in a long while. When he finally lifted his coffee, his words were simple but carried the weight of years. "Thank you, Clara," he said quietly. No speeches, no embellishment. Just that. Clara felt the warmth of it deeper than the coffee, steadier than the sunlight. They lingered until the plates were clean, the coffee refilled one last time, the world outside fully awake. As they stepped out, the cold air greeted them, but so did something new. Townsfolk nodded as they passed, their eyes kind, their handshakes firmer. Some offering small salutes that Clara accepted with a grace born of long practice in invisibility. Today, though, that invisibility had lifted, if only a little. At the edge of the square, Mr. Nolan stood waiting, his coat buttoned against the breeze, his cane planted firm. He handed Clara his old service cap, the fabric soft and worn, the brim frayed from years of sun and rain. "For when you need a reminder of who knows," he said, his smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. Then he tipped his hat and turned his slow, steady steps, carrying him down the path, his figure blending into the tapestry of Maplewood life. Megan paused before leaving, uncertainty flickering across her face, then resolve taking its place. She stood tall, shoulders back, and raised her hand in a salute. Private, genuine, a gift given freely. Clara returned it with a nod, heart full, her smile small but unshakable. When the square was hers alone, she remained watching as the flag snapped sharp and bright in the wind. The breeze teased a loose strand of her hair, carried the faint scent of cider, and fallen leaves filled the quiet with promise. Clara breathed it in, the weight on her shoulders, lighter now, the town's heartbeat steady around her. And as the morning sun bathed Maplewood in gold, she smiled a smile of peace, of belonging, of being seen at last. In the gentle hush that followed, Maplewood seemed to breathe, as one touched by a moment that would linger far beyond the parade and applause. Clara's quiet strength, once overlooked, had reminded a town, and perhaps all of us, that true service wears many forms, and often the most profound courage is unseen. Like a candle glowing softly in a window on a winter night, a single act of kindness or honor can light the way for those who've lost their path. So today, perhaps take a moment to look beyond the surface. You might just find a quiet hero standing beside you.